Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan guru-murthy, and this is the podcast in which we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. My guest this week has so many different lives. You might know him as the guitar player alongside Bruce Springsteen in the E Street Band, or as Dante in The Sopranos. He's written a book about his life called Unrequited Infatuations. I'm talking about Stephen Van Zandt, and he joins me from America. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, my friend. Good to talk to you.
There's so much more to you than either of those things I just mentioned, of course, and that's what we're going to concentrate on this podcast, because we're here to talk about ways to change the world. And we could do whole interviews with you about your musical career or your acting career, but huge parts of your life have been about changing the world, because you've been an activist as much as a musician.
Well, yeah, the music led me that way. When I started my solo career and left the E Street Band, an entirely new adventure began. And the first half of my life really ended. And that's when the odyssey really does begin. And growing up in the Renaissance period of the 60s, it was very important that everybody had their own identity artistically. And so when I left the E Street Band, I said, well, you know, who am I going to be? And by then, I'd become obsessed with politics, learning about what my government was doing around the world. And I was shocked at what I found. So I decided I'll write about that. I'll be the political guy. You know, no one's really writing about politics full time. You know, you'll occasionally get a song here and there, but no one was doing it all the time. So I thought, well, that'll be my identity, and that's when my odyssey really did begin, and that's the whole second half of the book is my political adventures. You know,
you write about this moment in Germany where a guy talks to you as an American, and he holds you responsible for America. So tell me about that moment and how big a moment it was for you.
It was the biggest moment because, you know, I'm embarrassed to say it, but at the age of 30, you don't think of yourself that way as an American. You know, the kid asked me, you know, why are you putting missiles in my country? And I just brushed him off. You know, what the hell are you talking about? You know, I'm here to, you know, play my guitar, but for weeks it stayed with me. And I was like, why is this bothering me? And then, you know, obviously the obvious revelation was he doesn't see me as a rock and roll guy or a Republican or a Democrat. He sees me as an American. And that doesn't occur to you until you leave, of course, until you're traveling overseas, you know, and suddenly you realize you're an American. And I thought, well, maybe I am putting missiles in this country, and I wonder what else I'm doing. So I began studying our foreign policy since World War II, and was very shocked to find out that we were not the heroes of democracy around the world. We were not supporting all, you know, the best leaders, and I decided that that's what I would write about, to show some, you know, shed some light on that subject, mostly because it was all hidden back then. You know, the 80s. You know, we had this grandfatherly cowboy, Ronald Reagan, you know, who's everybody was in love with, you know, and behind the scenes, well hidden, was this enormous amount of criminal activity being conducted by our government with our tax dollars, obviously. So I thought this needs to be exposed, and that's what I spent the 80s doing.
So in the period before that, I mean, are you saying you were just politically agnostic, you know, ignorant? You know, what was it? I mean, because we think of Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band as so all American, and politically American, really, with a small p.
It became that way, but you know, in the beginning, you're just trying to make it, man. You know, it was impossible to make it a living playing rock and roll. And that's all we thought about. I managed to ignore all of the politics of the 60s. And believe me, there was plenty going on. I mean, there was, you know, Vietnam and civil rights and assassinations all over the place. I mean, I completely ignored it. I was, as you know, non-political, apolitical, ignorant as could be, right up until the end of the 70s, when Bruce decided to do the no nukes thing, and we did a Vietnam veterans benefit. So those were the first two sort of brushes with politics that I had.
I mean, that's incredible, isn't it, really, to think back that, the civil rights era was going on when you were, being a musician. And you're saying it just didn't touch you?
No, I mean, you were aware of it and you were certainly, philosophically in support of it, but we were already integrated in my world. We were integrated in music long before society was. We grew up with Motown, right alongside rock and roll. It was rock, soul, rock, soul, rock, soul. And that's why I combined the two when I started Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes. We were the first rock band to really have that soul element integrated, but we grew up with it. I mean, Alan Freed in the 50s is playing, black rock and black music for his white audience, so all the way back to the 50s, we were starting to be integrated. Yes, philosophically, I was, of course, in favor of all that stuff, but I wasn't going to go march and protest. I was too busy trying to find a way to make it in rock and roll and get through high school, which I couldn't care less about either.
Well, before we come to the how you wanted to change the world, let's just back up a little bit in terms of the rock and roll dream, because your life and the dream, if you like, is a little framed by a love for the Beatles.
Well, that was the beginning of, that was the big bang for me, because I wasn't interested in show business. Mostly at the time, it was mostly individuals. I kind of missed the 50s. But still, there was that the Chuck Berrys and Elvis Presleys and they would do up harmony groups, but there weren't that many bands. Bands did not really exist. So here comes the Beatles and the entire British invasion that followed, which was one great band after the other. 4 or 5 guys playing and singing and really appealing to our young minds. And it was a brand new thing, this band thing. And it communicated an entirely different communication than an individual, which is all about me, me, me. You have to love me or not. And that's what appealed to me. I was like, this is beyond show business. This is a lifestyle. And I want to be part of that lifestyle. That lifestyle is where I belong, and I didn't have any place to belong before that. I was a complete freak, misfit, and outcast, and thankfully found my place in the world once the British invasion happened. So the Beatles were everything to me. I mean, I always connected with the Rolling Stones, who came 4 months later, because the Beatles they revealed a new world. But they were way too good. They were really sophisticated by the time we discovered them halfway through the career. The Stones come 4 months later and they make it look a little bit easier than it is. And they're very casual about the clothes. The hair is not perfect, except for Brian Jones. And, no harmony whatsoever. And they were the first punk band, really. So the way I like to put it is the Beatles revealed a whole new world to us, and the Rolling Stones invited us in.
Does that love of the band, the community, relate at all to your position in in the E Street Band and with Bruce Springsteen as the right-hand man, the rock and roll consigliere?
Well, yeah. I mean, I was just naturally a band guy, and that carried right into the acting thing with the Sopranos. I became an ensemble guy. I was a leader of my own band at the same time. We each had our individual band, so I knew what it was like to be a leader of a band, and I always was the boss in my world. So it was a little bit unexpected, because I was just as popular as Bruce was locally. It was a little unexpected when I joined his band, and I started calling him the boss. And because we were friends first, I just fell naturally into that underboss consigliere role. And then oddly enough, or not, that's how the role developed in The Sopranos also. Suddenly, I was fulfilling that same role in the mafia family in fiction as I was in real life. So it's just my natural inclination. I just am naturally never really wanted to be the front man. I see myself as a writer and a producer. The performance part of my life is the vacation part. It's fun. The work begins when you leave the stage, not when you walk onto the stage.
I could talk to you for hours about joining bands and starting bands and your relationship with Bruce and all those sorts of things. But let's get back to your epiphany, if you like, that you were just telling us about learning about America's role in the world. What did you then want to do with it? What did you see as your mission?
Well, I saw it as an artist slash journalist, where you look at these situations, study them, do the research. I mean, first of all, I made a list of all the conflicts around the world. I think there was 44 at the time, and noticed a lot of them we were simply on the wrong side of. And I decided, our art form is a storytelling art form. Okay, it's not really built for a lot of information communication. It's built for emotional communication. I took the facts and the reality, and then would turn it into a song and turn it into a story. But then on the record jackets, I would list the list of books that I had read that went into the content of that particular album.
And were people interested? I mean, is that what your fans wanted to hear?
No, it was not. Look, in my life, you're lucky if you get defined once by an audience. Okay, that means they've found you, they've defined you. Usually, they define you forever the way they first discover you. In my case, it happened twice. It would also happen with me in the acting world. Asking them to define me a third time as an artist has been, one bridge too far. This is what the title of the book really is about, is the things that are most important to me, the most personal, embodied by my solo albums, has never found an audience. So, you have to adjust to that, the fact that life does not cross over, man. They define you this way, that's how they like you, and that's how they're going to stay with. And anything else you do, you're starting from scratch. You're not going to get much crossover from the other career, as it were. In other ways, this is what a lot of people experience in their lives, and I wanted the book to be more universal than just a story about music and a kid making it in the music business, which is the first half of the book. But the second half goes to other places that I think are much more relatable in a more universal themes.
But there was a lot more to it than just writing songs and putting out political records, wasn't there? I mean, let's talk about your whole South African odyssey, if you like, and Artists United Against Apartheid. How did that begin?
Just one of the conflicts on my list, one of the 40 plus conflicts, but I couldn't find out much about it. It wasn't really an issue in America, first of all. It was very big in Europe.
Americans didn't really know about what was going on in South Africa.
No. I mean, a couple of people who would mention it from time to time. Harry Belafonte, or even Stevie Wonder would mention it. Randall Robinson. A few people were trying to make it an issue, but it just wasn't. I was doing a lot of research trying to find out, because the conventional wisdom was there was government reform going on. And, it was going to be better down there, and, improvements. So, I'm reading that, and I went down there, but basically I couldn't find out enough about it. So I decided I have to go. And I went, and I actually went twice in 1984. And I went with an open mind, frankly. I was ready to see government reforms. And then, I would have been talking about ending the boycott, the United Nations boycott. And I would have, if I felt it was unfair, or I would have talked about that.
So what did you see when you got there?
Well, when I got there, I saw basically modern day slavery. They had used our Indian reservations as a sort of model. They decided very, very quickly now, if I can say it quickly, to take the Black population, move them physically, forcibly to so-called homelands, the tribal homelands, which didn't really exist. And then, having moved them there physically, they would make South Africa proper become a democracy, and then bring the Black population back in as immigrant labor. It's a completely brilliant and evil scheme. One of these phony homelands had a resort called Sun City, And they were paying people lots of money, extra, much more than they could have earned, to come down there and play, and telling them that you're not violating the boycott because it's a different country, Bapu Tuswana. And that was just a lie. They were trying to convince people that, these homelands were different countries, and then they're going to, at some point, declare them different countries.
And big stars were going to play at Sun City, weren't they?
Yeah, they're making, it was like $100,000 a week or maybe $200,000 a week. I mean, back then it was real money. And, and they fooled enough people to come. And I used the Sun City Resort as a symbol of apartheid, and came home, took the song off of my third album, Freedom No Compromise, and decided to have a few artists on it so it would get more attention, because it wasn't going to get much attention on one of my albums, because my albums just never did find an audience. We ended up being very, very, very successful with it. It really just lit the fuse. It helped spark a movement that was already in existence, and we had to somehow use the cultural boycott to bridge the sports boycott, which was quite effective, and the economic boycott, which is where we needed to be. It was the economic boycott that was going to end apartheid. So we used the cultural boycott as a bridge between the two, and raised the consciousness. And we raised the consciousness enough that when the sanctions bill came to Congress, the all-important sanctions bill, and Reagan vetoed it, of course, which we expected, the Congress overrode the veto, which was the first time Reagan ever had a veto overridden. And that took a lot of consciousness raising to accomplish that, which I'm very proud of the fact that we did.
So when you were putting together the artists for that song, who was the sort of the star, if you like, that made you think this one's going to fly? This is going to be big.
I made a list of artists that, not necessarily because of their celebrity, but because of what they were saying with their work and their involvement in issues. I had Miles Davis at the top of my list because of his life. His whole life was a fight against bigotry. And when Miles Davis walked in, I felt, now I have something extraordinary. But in the end, we had a whole bunch of terrific people. Very important to get Bob Dylan, who sparked the entire political consciousness of our industry single-handedly. I wanted to have, the important bands represented as much as I could. I wanted the Beatles represented, which they were, by Ringo. The Stones represented, Keith Richards and Ronnie Wood did a song. Many of the important people that, were able to be very committed to this issue, because it was a crossing the line from social concern to political. We named Ronald Reagan in the song, so it was going to be a risk to your career to join in on this one.
So why do you think that this issue flew in a way that other issues that you were fixated on and researching didn't?
Well, it just was, I think it was a good timing. You couldn't do it now, I'll tell you that. I'm glad we did it when we did it.
Why couldn't you do it now?
Oh, forget it. The world is insane now. We're fighting for the existence of democracy in America right now, and losing that battle, by the way, at the moment. So things have gotten really, really worse economically around the world. Everybody just, very much focused on your own survival, be it economic or be it democratic in our case.
But do you not think cultural leadership is still something that, can make a difference in the way that it did in the 80s?
Yeah. The difference is nothing's hidden anymore. The important role that culture was playing in my case was exposing all of this criminal activity, and the Republican Party has embraced being against democracy, equality, and science, openly against those three rather important subjects. Okay, so what do you say? What are you supposed to say about that? What do you do about that? That's why my last two records have no politics on them, because it was redundant. What am I going to say about a president that brags about putting kids in cages to deter immigration. It's complicated right now to sort of have a political movement other than the basics, which is organize, and vote and try and get around the voter suppression legislation. But it's more dangerous than that. I mean, everybody's focused on the suppression aspects of what's going on. That's not the biggest danger. The biggest danger is in half of these bills, and I've read them, there's nullification. This is the word people need to learn right now, not suppression. Suppression, it takes a lot of work, and it shouldn't exist, but it takes a lot of work, but you can beat it. You can't beat nullification. Nullification is the people vote, and then the state legislature decides, oh, we don't like those votes. We're throwing those votes away, and we're going to decide who gets elected. All right? That's called fascism, authoritarianism. It ain't democracy. And that's what these bills say. So, we still can raise consciousness about these things and organize, and hopefully, stop this. But it's beyond the boycott level. We led the boycott in North Carolina when they started to, show bigotry against the LGBTQ, community. The E Street Band led that boycott in North Carolina. Now it's in 20 states. You can't use boycotts anymore. It's too ubiquitous. They're all over the place.
So have you lost hope, or have you still got hope for political change? I mean, you're sounding quite desperate about this.
I'm hanging on to hope by a thread, but frankly, between us, I love Joe Biden. He's the wrong guy at the wrong time. Here's the problem in America. We're in a war, and only one side's fighting it. And this has been the case, more or less, off and on, since Goldwater. Certainly since Nixon, certainly since Reagan, and forget Trump. I mean, there's a war going on. And then the older I get, the more clearly it becomes the good guys and the bad guys. The gray areas are gone. At the state level, it's a war in every single state, but we need national help. And right now we have two Democrats, I'm sure you know about, Manchin and Sinema, who are so-called Democrats, and give the Democrats this very, very tiny majority, but they're Republicans dressed in Democrats' clothing. I mean, they're actually Republicans holding up everything. Everything's being held up by these two people because the margins are so close, and because the Democratic Party have done such a terrible job in terms of the legislative process. The last election, everybody thought was a success because we got rid of Trump. It was not a success. It was a terrible election. We lost, most of the House and most of the Senate. Yes, we retained a tiny, tiny majority, but we're seeing what that means. You can barely get anything done. They're getting nothing done right now. So I'm hanging on to optimism by a thread. But where are the tough good guys? And believe me, and it's the same thing in England, by the way. It's exactly the same thing in England. The whole horrors of Brexit, completely manipulated by lies. So yes, we still have a role to play. To answer your question, the long way. It's just tougher than ever, but there's a role to play in terms of raising consciousness and organizing. That'll never change. But we need help from the top down here for the first time, and we're not getting it.
I mean, you said something, I think, along the lines of, when you looked at sort of the foreign problems around the world that America was involved in, you felt you had the answers and that you could start addressing the answers in your work. So do you regret actually concentrating on what was going on abroad rather than what was going on in America?
Well, no, it reflected what was going on in America. And sometimes it's easier to do it that way, to let people see what they're doing themselves by looking at someone else. And it was such an exaggerated bigotry in South Africa that it was, I thought, helpful to see this is the extreme case of prejudice and racial bigotry. But by looking at them, hopefully you're going to see yourself. And in the end, we couldn't get the song on the radio because it was too black for white radio and too white for black radio. Just to make the point, right? That we had our own apartheid in America and still do.
Now, again, frustratingly, I kind of feel like we're only scratching the surface. But normally, I draw this podcast to a close by asking people if there was a way to change the world, how would they change it? But you helpfully have written a 9-point plan at the end of your book.
Well, I have a whole political book half written, which I eventually will finish. But I wanted to give a little taste of it, just on that 1 page or 2 pages, whatever it is, at the very end of I think it's the last chapter of the book, just for conversation purposes.
I mean, one of the things that's interesting. I mean, we won't go through it all because maybe people should read it for themselves. But I mean, one of the things you say is eradication of black communities. Now, just talk me through that thought for a second, because that's a controversial thought for a lot of people.
I think the biggest scam ever perpetrated on the black population by the white population was convincing them that the black communities was their idea. It is not. And I think it's time for those of us in America to invite our black population to join the rest of us in America, okay, where they are not right now. For 50 years, I'm hearing about how we're going to fix the hood, fix the neighborhood, better education, better police, better housing, better this, better that. Why? Why does it exist? It shouldn't exist. There's no, when people first come immigration, they may have an Italian neighborhood or a Polish neighborhood, but then they get integrated. When are we going to start integrating our country? I think, a couple 400 years now is enough, and until we do that, these problems are never going to go away. Enough of this ridiculous segregation. That's what it is. The black neighborhoods were there so the white people could control them, just like the apartheid system. But anyway, that's, why is that controversial?
Well, I suppose because a lot of people believe in multicultural communities living alongside each other equally, rather than integrating and mixing.
Well, I think it's insulting to tell somebody, who's black or any anything, any ethnic group, you're going to be less of a person, less creative, less imaginative, if you don't have a black person living on both sides of you. I mean, it's insulting, I think. To say, you need that community to support your thoughts or your well-being. Why? Why is that? I don't have that. Nobody I know that's white has that problem. And there are many, many ethnic groups, different white ethnic groups. Why is it only true for Latinos or for black people? I think it's absolutely unfair and it's never going to get fixed, and so they continue to fight for survival because, it's never going to, it's just not the way it should be.
Stevie Van Zandt, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for talking to us today.
Good talking to you, my friend.
Our producer is Rachel Evans, and you can watch all of these interviews on the Channel 4 News YouTube channel. Until next time, bye-bye.